Now, we have time for questions relating to the arts and David's presentation. So are there any questions now that arise from that in people's minds? Susan, please. And again, I'll say, as I always say, in introducing yourself, please, although we are getting to know each other quite well, but please, for the benefit of people who aren't here, name please.
Susan O'Keefe. Thanks a million for that. I just want to know what it looks like afterwards. How do the worker bees and the philosophers do business together? How do they sit together? How do they look like when they get there in terms of their constituency responsibilities and their great philosophical thoughts?
We'll take a couple of questions, and that's a question for David, I think. Although Michael might have his own take on that as well, so, or either of the Michaels. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah, we take one at the back.
Andrew Kinsella is my name. Just a question on the, and this is at the risk of confusing myself even further, on the mixed member PR system. I understand that there are one-seat constituencies. Therefore, it effectively becomes a first-past-the-post situation. Is there any system whereby you can have the list system combined with a multi-seat constituency? Therefore, the smaller parties can still get representation, and it doesn't necessarily fall to the larger party.
Okay, good question. Francis?
I just want to ask you about the evidence in relation to the mixed model. Are there any links to countries doing better economically? I mean, what's the evidence about the outcomes from the mixed system? I think it'd be interesting to hear about that.
Okay, the three good questions. I think, David, will you start?
So let me start with Susan's question then about the how does it work on the ground. It kind of varies with what. Here's two ways of doing it. So Germany has used the mixed member system ever since the Second World War. It was the first country to use it. And what you tend to find is that a lot of the time the politicians will share their offices. So you'll have a constituency office with a list, a constituency MP working side by side with the list MP. And as I said already, because one could become the other after the election, they tend to sort of work out how they're best going to operate on the ground together. So it's from what I've been told and what I've read, and I was actually speaking to some people only recently about this in Germany. It works pretty well in Germany on the ground. They're familiar with it, and that's the way it works. But a feature of German politics generally is that they don't put nearly as much emphasis on constituency work as we're used to in this part of the world. So for me, a better example is Wales and Scotland, both of which use this system for electing the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. And in those cases, you do get a much more antagonistic relationship. Not always, but it can be more antagonistic, where you get the constituency politician saying, MP saying, I'm the constituency MP, and you're just a list MP, so you back off. So you can get that potential battle. And it can also, what doesn't help is that the allocation of state resources favours the constituency politician because they'll get resources to run a constituency office, whereas the list ones won't because they don't need a constituency office is the argument. So it can be a more antagonistic relationship, and I would have thought there's possibly a greater likelihood that we would be looking at the Welsh and the Scottish examples rather than the German example in that regard. In terms of Andrew's question, Michael will be addressing that directly after this, and the short answer is yes, you could easily have multi-seat constituencies to elect your constituency politicians. You could mix single transferable vote with list very easily, and so you're absolutely right. It hasn't been done anywhere else, but there's no reason why it couldn't be done here. But Michael will address that in his presentation. And then Francis was asking whether there's any evidence of a better run system, better run economy, better run political system as a result of mixed member proportional. There's no systematic evidence. There's a very small number of cases, and countries change their electoral systems over time. There's nothing systematically gathered. All that is known is that generally the proportional systems, which includes our existing system, generally have better outcomes. But it's not a very powerful relationship. I don't know if either of the Michaels want to come in, but that's an attempt.
Nothing. Just on the economy aspect, the fact that Germany was one of the first countries to adopt this system and the German economy grew a lot was a factor in leading other countries maybe to put two and two together, possibly erroneously, and thinking, well, if Germany adopted that and then its economy did well, perhaps we should have the same system and then maybe our economy will grow well, but will grow similarly. But of course, whether the economy thrives or not is dependent on a huge range of factors, and it's completely inconclusive as to whether the electoral system contributes at all to that.
Francis, yeah.
It's just a follow-up question. Did you say, David, that in the mixed system, that the people who get elected from the list, because they're from smaller parties, tend not to be in government? So you still end up with your government being formed by those who've been elected from the constituency list. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So it doesn't feed through then to formation of government, actually. Is that the point? But you get a parliament that is seen to be maybe more representative.
That's exactly right. You get a parliament that tends to be more representative. In the briefing document, there's a table from the last German election, and you'll see that the current government, the biggest party in that government was the Christian Democratic, the CDU party, and the vast bulk of the seats that they won were constituency seats. So the bigger parties tend to pick up constituency seats.
Two questions now. Firstly, Joanna, and then Catherine. Yeah.
Well, it's just...
Again, please, could you
David,
introduce yourself?
Sorry, Joanna Tuffy, TD. David, at the last meeting, you said, my understanding of what you said was that in constituencies with mixed member systems, that the MPs elected on lists tended to mimic the work of constituency MPs and do constituency work because they wanted to become constituency MPs. And I just wanted to double check that.
Okay. Catherine?
Catherine Murphy. You're obviously focusing on Germany, but you said that there was less localism obviously at national level, but there is an extremely good local government system. So and there's very rock solid institutions in terms of delivery of services, and those two things are very serious factors. And I think it's important to maybe say something about those.
Okay, thank you. Over here. Katrina.
Margaret, Katrina Ruan. Agus Margaret Tween presentation shouldn't be go hintach. I really enjoyed your presentations, but something I'd like maybe to give us a bit of a focus on is we've spent a weekend here looking at the lack of women in our political system and the detriment that's causing to our society and also the political fabric of our society and culture. And I just wonder, could you maybe focus a little bit more on the gender aspects, advantages or disadvantages of changing our system? Because right now it doesn't seem to be working for women in our society. And how can we change that? And will this have an impact on it?
Okay, thank you. And let's go back to the panel now. Again, David, do you want to lead off on this?
Yeah, yes, Joanna, you're right. I mean, I had raised last time when I was talking about the fact that the list politicians might try and mimic the constituency politicians. That sort of gets back to the point I was saying earlier on, I think it was to Susan, that in the Welsh and the Scottish systems, because the resources from the state focus on the constituency politicians, that means the constituency politicians are seen to have a bit more status and a bit more potential to look after their own fate because they're fighting for their own safety, their own re-election. So you will tend to get that element of tension far more greatly than you will in the German system. So that would be a feature, and I would suspect if we went down that road, that could be a feature here too. And that kind of also leads to Catherine's question. You're so right to stress that one of the reasons why Germany doesn't have such a focus by its politicians on constituency work, you're spot on, it's exactly that. It's a very powerful infrastructure, far better run social services than we have here, far more powerful local government, far more powerful government at regional level. So the voters, the demand for this sort of thing is not directed so much at the MPs, it's directed in other areas. And that is why it's often said that if we were to consider electoral reform in this country, it should perhaps be combined with other things like local government reform and the like. So you're absolutely right to raise it. And then Katrina, on gender aspects, I mean, One simple thing I'll talk about there is it would be up to the parties as to how they would operate, but a party that was going to take the gender role seriously could then use the list election to make sure that as many women candidates as possible are at the top of the list, so that any list seats they pick up, they'll be given to women candidates. So the advantage of the mixed member proportional system is it's more proportional, so you get more women, but also because of the closed lists, they can rank the women at the top, and then you'll get a lot more women.
Okay, thank you. Charlie and then James.
Thanks, Charlie Flanagan. Briefly, Chair, could I just suggest to David that perhaps too little emphasis has been placed on the power of the party, and that a change of the system to a list system really empowers the political parties with a huge degree of influence in the electoral process, and that people need to be mindful of the power that's being vested in the parties. Could I suggest, if there were, not that there ever would be, some hate figure in Parliament who had done some serious wrongdoing on his or her constituents and stood for re-election, that person could be rejected by the people, but could be first on the list because that person was favoured by the party, and the people would have absolutely no choice in terms of the election or otherwise of that individual. And that is a fundamental flaw of the system if people don't want to vest huge power in their particular parties. Thank you.
Thank you. James.
James Smannon, Lumford Westmeath, TD. How do you go about how do you go about in other countries fostering integrity and people's confidence in those type of political systems? I feel that political parties, people have their doubt about them. Does it be operated under is it operated under an electoral commission, or is there a body set up to oversee the implementation? So it's all about safeguarding electoral integrity in any political system that we go, any new system we go about setting up, and I think. Would it be under the guidance of the Commission?
We will be coming to that issue later in the agenda this weekend, the whole issue of electoral commissions and how they might operate to better effect.
I mean,
we'll take the question.
It's
James.
public confidence in a system
sure,
like this.
Exactly, precisely, yeah. Okay, one more comment before we go back? Okay, again, could we go back, David?
So quickly, but the Michaels will come in. I suspect Michael Marsh, particularly on James's question. Charlie, on the power of the party, absolutely. That is a fundamental of moving to a list system. You are giving a lot more power to political parties than we have in our current system. Because in our current system, if you remember, the parties can decide in whatever way they decide they want to decide which candidates run for election, but the voters pick the candidates that they want to elect. Under the mixed member proportional system for the list part, the candidates can pick the list and decide the rank ordering of the list. And as Charlie said, you can have a hate figure that we would all love to get rid of, and the party could decide to put that candidate at the top of the list, and it would be quite hard then to stop that person from being re-elected. So while I was talking a few minutes ago to Katrina about one positive of the mixed member system in terms of more women, here's a negative, that you'd have a potential negative, that you would have much more power to political parties. I'll let the Michaels come in because I'm speaking too much.
We'll talk about that in a moment.
Yes.
Microphone, get closer to the microphone. Yeah.
Clearly, a list system of this sort gives more power to parties. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If parties keep nominating candidates that people don't like, perhaps people will stop voting for those parties. It's a big risk for parties to put up very unpopular candidates because their own popularity will suffer. I think the difficulty, I think, with cynicism about parties is that the only way electoral democracy can work in the world is through parties. We don't have systems of electoral democracy without parties anywhere. because it's very hard to imagine how it would work if we sent 166 independent TDs to the Dáil. How would they form a government? What would they do? And what would the relationship be of what that government did to however people voted in a constituency for an individual? The shortcut that parties at least are supposed to give us is that they stand for some broad sweeping ideas or inclinations, and we support that, and that feeds in some way or other to the way they govern. In the absence of parties, it's anarchy.